All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know the audience is a little thinner today than the session that we had yesterday, but I really thank Aidan Curran for being here today. He's recording this session, so if you're worried about confidentiality or something like that, the session is being recorded. I just want to make sure you knew that. We have three speakers today. I wanted to ask Sarah and Steve if you want to just stand up so we can have the camera capture your visage. You want to introduce yourself, Sarah?
Sure, yeah. My name is Sarah Tangeman. I'm an instructional designer here at UD, newest member of the team. Come from a background in teaching, so this is an important topic to me as well, and I'm thrilled that you're here, that we can bring this to you as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Steve?
Hi, Steve Wilhoit, the English department in LTC, and like you, I'm just learning about ChatGPT and trying to figure out what it is and how it's going to impact what we do.
Thank you. So I really appreciate, this has been a team effort to get this session together. It affects everyone. So this is really has to be a team effort because it crosses all of our disciplines. What you may have noticed is I kept looping the same piece of music over and over again at the beginning. The reason why I thought it was interesting is because that is an example of AI-generated music. So all of the things that we've taken for granted as being sort of highly cognitive, creative kinds of contributions that humanity's made, those things are now being increasingly made using technology that sort of takes on some of the cognitive load of doing that work. Today it's mostly we're talking about GPT, but AI is going to affect almost all aspects of our lives. And so with that, we've got three speakers. I'll start by talking a little bit about ChatGPT, where it came from and how it fits into the bigger landscape of AI. Sarah will talk at the end about some of the practical things that we'll be able to take away about things we can change in our teaching practices. And Steve in the middle will talk about sort of like the theory of writing as it is a pedagogy, and now in the world of ChatGPT, how does that change? So, one of the things I was going to ask for those people who are faculty teaching, I'm kind of curious if you want to put a show of hands, how many are kind of getting stressed out a little bit by the news of ChatGPT? Some are stressed out. Not everyone's stressed out, that's good. Because one of the things I want to try to make sure is we get out of this session is a sense that this tool is going to be here for the long run, and it's something that we can leverage and take advantage of. But for those who feel especially stressed out, because we know that students could potentially use this for potentially academic dishonesty, I'll sort of pull my card that says that I'm a British citizen just for one moment. This is the one time in my life I can actually show this poster. Because being British, I know the origin of this poster was to help morale during the Second World War. And it seems like it fits into the picture that we have right now, so to keep calm and carry on. But that's probably not the right message for us to leave today. We don't want you to carry on doing things as if nothing's happening. So with your indulgence, I'll modify this so it sounds like it's coming from a Marianist university. So I'll say, keep calm, adapt, and change. Because I think we do need to change and respond to what's happening. Both in terms of the teaching practices that we use, like the importance of writing and how that's used in the classroom, but also because we want to try to make sure our students are better positioned to be successful in an AI-rich world. Now, we've been in situations like this before. If you're a math teacher, you would have known about PhotoMath. This is an app that can be installed on a cell phone. The students can take an image of a math problem, even if it's handwritten, and the app will actually solve the math problem step by step. Because that software exists, it doesn't mean that math classes stopped. We still continue with math classes, and faculty have learned to adjust with its existence. Similarly, we have language classes going on today, even though we have Google Translate. And Translate, the application, is getting better and better because of AI. So this is a tool, but it doesn't necessarily replace the importance of classes in languages and other forms of education. So education is constantly learning to adapt. So this is not unusual for us to be here talking about ChatGPT. Just some background about AI for those who may not know its functions, it's what it's doing today. So AI is essentially a computing device that's both the combination of the hardware and the software that's used to act on environmental stimuli like sounds, vision, in a way that mimics natural intelligence. And in some regards, so I'm a neurobiologist by training, and I like the fact that the computing technology that I'm increasingly using is acting more and more like the brain, but it's still a long way from the higher cognitive functions of a whole brain. What we have right now is mostly what's known as specialized AI. ChatGPT would be an example of a specialized AI in that it's very task-orientated. It's a very specific task. Things like self-driving cars, the software that powers a self-driving car, that's specialized AI. Image recognition, speech recognition, all of those pieces of software will do that task, but it couldn't do the other task that the other software is doing. And that actually mimics the way the brain is sort of subdivided into portions. And one of the newest types of specialized AI is what we call generative AI. And again, this is the class of software that ChatGPT belongs in. It means that that's a kind of software that synthesizes media, whether it's an image or a piece of text. It actually creates it for us. The highest level of AI actually has not been written yet. That's called general AI, and that's the most human-like in intelligence. So that would be a piece of software that encompasses everything else and is generally competent at being able to do all things just as a human brain would be able to do. So that's sort of like expecting all of the parts of the brain to be connected together, and we're not there yet. We think maybe 10 years, 20 years from now, that will be something we'll have on the horizon, but it's not here today. One other important point to remember about AI is that it is impacting everyone in all of our professions. Reports like this one from the Brookings Institute indicated, even though it's an older report from 2019, it's important because reports like this tell us that all of our career pathways are changing. I think ChatGPT has certainly woken up our interest as teachers today, and suddenly we got very anxious and aware of AI. But in reality, this is happening across all of the professions. And that just says even more so that we really have to adjust what we're doing so that we can prepare our students for that future that they're going to be participating in. There are new companies that are starting up to generate this AI software. The company known as OpenAI is the origin of ChatGPT. It's a research lab in San Francisco. It's actually a small company. It only has about 300 employees, but it started off as a sort of a research-only organization. It was funded up front by people like Elon Musk with a sort of a very high-level philosophical view of creating AI that's good for the common good. However, it's changed because right there, I pointed out, it started in 2015 as a non-profit, but today we now realize it's actually a for-profit, in part because it's getting a lot of investment from companies like Microsoft. And in fact, we believe, we're not exactly sure, but we think $10 billion was traded hands from Microsoft so that Microsoft now owns the licensing rights for ChatGPT going forward. And one other point that's important is that I've added this here, is that the model that OpenAI was using is true for Google and Microsoft and other companies in AI, and that is that it's a cloud-based AI service. That means that, and that sounds like very techy, but it's really important for everyone to understand that you may think of the cloud as a place to put files, data files, images, email, stuff like that. But the cloud is also now becoming intelligent. And it's a commodity that you can purchase space in the cloud for doing thinking. And that's increasingly what AI means. It's a cloud-based activity. So just in the last few years, OpenAI has released two big pieces of software. I wanted to talk briefly about one of them here, just so you understand that this is affecting more than just the world of text. DALL-E 2 is a piece of software that creates images. And so you're welcome to use it. It's sort of free for casual use, and then you pay for upper usage limits. But this is the prompt that I gave it. I said, create a photorealistic image of a sculpture of the Wright brothers made with wool. That's what I typed in. And then I hit enter, and it gave me this image in 1 second. Now, possibly this violates some copyright laws because it's possible that it's scraping bits of images from other people's pictures from the internet and stitching it together to create this image. So there may be some legal reasons for me to not publish this myself and say, hey, I just created this. But that's sort of like the trend in AI. It's sort of infiltrating all of our professions. And here the folks in the world of art probably getting a little anxious that their idea of creating art is being changed by this. This is a video that I know Julianne was very kind in creating this for us. This is a piece of software called Midjourney, I think you called it. Just to show you that the process that these kinds of platforms take is interesting because it's an iterative process. Like here, she's actually taking the steps necessary to create an image of a group of happy students in a class with a happy teacher. And I love that. I'm like, oh, wow, that's a perfect idea for a picture. And what you're noticing is that she's creating this, allowing the software to go through iterations of change to manage this picture so that it becomes better and better aligned with what she was looking for. Different artistic styles, for example, that looks like crayon or graphic artist version and so forth. So so this is the nature of the artist today. Their role as a creator has changed using this kind of tool, but they're still artists. So the same company, OpenAI, created ChatGPT, and this was released in November of last year. So it's only been a few months, but the software was actually in development for a lot longer period of time. It is an example of the generative, specialized AI, and its job is to produce text responses to prompts that you've typed in. So we're not talking about software that's listening to my voice or speaking to me. It's all text-based. I'm typing in something and it types something back. On the top, there's an example of what I mean by that. So I typed in the words, who are you? This was actually my very first question that I asked ChatGPT. And it got back to me very quickly and it says, I am an artificial intelligence assistant trained to help answer questions and provide information on a wide range of topics. So that's the sort of thing it does. It just gives you a response quite like that. But it generates other things. It can generate software code. If you're a programmer, you can ask it to generate code. Now, generally that code is not perfect, and people who have looked at it said it doesn't quite match our expectations, and it's certainly not a really long piece of software. It's usually what's known as a routine, a little simple task that's running within a bigger software program, but that could be helpful for software programmers. It can write poetry, it can write song lyrics, and it can translate. And there's more things. Every time it seems like we turn around, it's doing something different and new. It is an example of a chatbot, which means it's conversational. So once I typed in, who are you, it got a response back to me, and I can send something else back to it. It's like, really, where did you come from? And it will know what it had said earlier. So it sort of keeps this conversation going. And it's natural. That's why we call it a natural language processor. The letters GPT stand for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which probably doesn't mean anything to anyone, but the word transformer says something about the architecture of how the software works. So at the heart of this, there's a big database that contains little fragments of text that essentially are words or parts of words. And more importantly, it's the connections between those words that make up this big database. And by big, I mean terabytes in size. It's huge and incredibly computer intensive. In order to create that database, it's called a model. So the people in the AI world would call this a large language model. In order for that database to be created, It ingests all of the freely available text, which is primarily everything on the internet that people can browse on a web browser. It will use open textbooks, open books, and at the first it probably was using Twitter, although I know it didn't use that in the most recent version. And then over time it assimilates that information. Then the software was watching people act out the behaviors that we wanted the software to be able to do. Next, the software is allowed to do its job, and humans read the text and grade the responses so that the cycle continues, the software changes and improves so that those connections between the individual fragments in the database change their relative importance so that the database becomes better tuned in responding to a question. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is that it's actually, we say it's AI. The A makes it sound like it's artificial, but in fact it uses an awful lot of human work in order to make this work. People were hired from around the world to be able to review the answers and grade the responses so that it was more appropriate. And then I'd also challenge the word intelligence, because it's really not intelligent. It doesn't understand the meaning of the things we ask it. It just simply spits out an answer based on all of the mathematical probabilities associated with that term and how it connects to other terms. So it's very much a database that's connected with math. And then one important point is that this collection of knowledge was retrieved prior to spring of 2022. So as you use ChatGPT today, you'll notice that its responses are kind of cast in stone with the timestamp from spring 2022 and earlier, not after it, which could be helpful because it means that we can ask students more recent things in essays and assignments, and GPT wouldn't be able to respond, at least right now. To use it, you simply go to this link. You need to create an account so that it is able to keep a hold of your history. Because when you log back in again, you can go back and find the chats that you had with the software. It'll give you some warning messages, and I'll mention something about that in a moment. This is the home page. It's very simple. It has a little text box down at the bottom that you can start typing into, and you can actually type a lot into that little box, so it'll scroll. It gives you some examples of things to type if you never used it before. It warns you that it could make mistakes, it could be biased, and it has limited knowledge of anything after 2021. This is how I started using it. Because I'm a scientist, I asked, how do cells make ATP? And so it gave me this response. I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. You know, and so this is not a copy of text from the internet. This is how ChatGPT is working. It takes my prompt, how do cells make ATP, and then it sort of uses everything it's seen on the internet before and the connections, and it's trying to remember those connections. So if I actually search the internet for that same text, I wouldn't be able to find it. It doesn't exist. So just to prove it, I actually hit the regenerate response button down there, or you could simply type in the question a second time, and it'll give you a different response. It's rather like watching Plinko. If you ever see, what's that game show? Price is Right, right? If you ever seen Plinko, you put a little bead on the top, and you go ding, 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 ding. So that's actually what's happening in the database. I put in a prompt, and it goes dunk, 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 and it's trying to hit all of the different, nodes in the database, and it's sort of random. So you don't really know where it's going to end up, and that's why that response is different from the one that came before it. If I were a student, I could select that text, cut and paste it, put it into an assignment that was expected from a teacher, and you may then be grading it thinking it was written by the student. And that's our biggest challenge, is that this is something that we have to be cognizant of as a fact that this is changing our teaching practices. Is it accurate? I'm not so sure about some of the humanities, but as a scientist, I was looking at the text pages it was generating, and I found that sometimes its responses were sometimes a little strange, and then I realized that in some cases it's actually wrong. And so here I actually go back one. It was talking about where ATP comes from, and it stressed the importance of mitochondria. And I thought, it's almost as if it's thinking that ATP is only ever made in mitochondria. So I asked the question, what about cells that do not have mitochondria? That's the conversational piece. Like I'm just following up, and then it starts giving me answers that makes it sound like cells that do not have mitochondria called anaerobic cells. And it's going off on a tangent that's wrong. It sounds perfectly legitimate. It's using all of the technical language. So that's one reason why when, if you've read articles like in the New York Times, someone actually said, this is BS, but it's really nicely written BS. So that's something to watch out for. But to be truthful, that's what a student would do. They don't know everything we know. So when you look at that, you'd say, oh, I could plausibly imagine a student writing that. So in fact, I did that. I took an assignment, an old one that I'd been using in the past. I selected some of the questions I had in the assignment, pasted it in, generates answers that to me would be graded, pretty highly. And that's the problem. Students would then pass that off as their own work. There are other things that ChatGPT does. And again, Julianne was really helpful in showing us some videos to walk through how this works. It's able to create a bibliography, a citation list. So here she asked, write an annotated bibliography about flipped classrooms in higher education, and off it goes. Now, we think some of this is actually being pasted in from the internet. We're not quite sure how this is happening. One thing, and I'll say this, it's important, I think, because when OpenAI was a nonprofit, it would regularly publish papers on how their software was being developed. There is no publications as of right now telling us how ChatGPT works because it's now a for-profit. And so I cannot tell exactly how this is being done, but it's weird magic. And it could be potentially really helpful. I could imagine this being a great search tool for us in the future. So there's that. And you'll notice it actually, the way the text is appearing makes it look like someone's typing it. But that's the Plinko phenomenon. That's the indicator going through the database level by level, plunk, 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 as it goes through to the very end. And in fact, that's important to remember because what that means is that it does not actually have an end in mind. When it looks like it's sort of rambling along, it is, in fact, almost randomly going in a certain direction. So this is another example that Julianne created, actually using a prompt from Carolyn Waldron. Sorry, yes. So Dr. Waldron has this assignment as an essay expectation for students, and so we typed in the prompt, and again, so this is from the humanities, and it generates a response that is, at least in my eyes, seemingly very complete, and it actually includes citations. Yikes. Enough of that. How about something fun? Could you write the lyrics for a song about the virtues of ChatGPT? And instantly it gives me a song. I'm like, holy moly. I like the chorus. ChatGPT, so quick and so bright, answers with ease day and night. It knows all the answers, never a doubt. With ChatGPT, we'll never be out. I'm like, whoa. But there are caveats. This is a work in progress. It's released only a few months ago. And it's technically very clearly labeled as an experiment. It's a prototype. So when you're using it, you're actually helping train it. That's the reason why it was published. Not necessarily to tell the world how wonderful this company is. It was using it so that we became the next data source for the system. It is sometimes overloaded by too many users. So if you actually try to log in at any moment, you may find it's kind of jammed with too many people. Technically, I could imagine that it could disappear at any time. It's completely a commercial product now, and so the company could pull it at any time because they may have another version coming. More likely, I think they're going to place it behind a paywall, just as they have with DALL-E 2. But what's really obvious to me now is that with Microsoft owning the license, it means that it's going to probably be embedded in many Microsoft tools. Things like Microsoft Word will have this. I could imagine, like if you're typing in Microsoft Word, it will auto-correct. Sometimes in Google Docs, you can have auto-complete. I can imagine auto-complete containing GPT, so that instead of sentences being filled out, it actually could give you a whole paragraph of the next paragraph and the next paragraph. Google is working on something similar. Microsoft could also insert this into Bing. We know that Google has some AI capabilities already, but they're working fast to integrate something similar to GPT in Google search. So whatever happens, GPT is going to be everywhere, or GPT-like software is going to be everywhere. And that's why the next point is important. We cannot practically block students from using this kind of technology. So if for some reason you think, well, folks in IT will just simply stop the traffic from the server and problem solved. We can control networks in classroom spaces, but we can't control networks that students can access through their cell phone. And they can connect their cell phone to their laptop, so you can easily circumnavigate any blocks that we put into place to stop students from accessing it. However, that doesn't stop you from using writing in the classroom. That would hopefully be something you can help monitor and see how they use writing in the classroom. A couple other points. Remember that it does make mistakes. Part of what I think we need to do is educate students about the fact that it's not completely trustworthy. It can generate biased responses because obviously it pulled data from the internet and it was trained by people. So those people will naturally incur their own biases that has sort of shifted the gravity, center of gravity of the software. And it's also possible that some of the content that it reports back may have copyright violations, but we don't know that for sure. So it's a work in progress, but clearly it already is disrupting our way of thinking about writing. And that's why we asked Steve if he could share some thoughts he has about how this can play out in the world of the pedagogy that we use in the classroom. Oh, yes, go ahead.
So a colleague of mine used two accounts. In the first account, he got some output from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And then used his second account and asked it if he wrote it. And he said it's like 95% I wrote it. Can we use this? Like, do you think it's going to change? It's going to change it to my I think, right?
So I've never heard of anyone using ChatGPT to check whether other writing came from ChatGPT. That sounds like a great research question that you could ask students to follow up with. We know that there are other search platforms that can be used. We'll mention a couple of them in just a moment. I'd be highly suspicious that right now they're not going to be effective at catching all of the possible student written work or ChatGPT written work. And that's kind of scary, and I understand that that's scary. But we also know that Turnitin.com is working on a solution that would allow it to be able to sort of more regularly report if something looks like it's plagiarized or it's written by GPT. But as of right now, we really have to be suspicious that anything that a student writes, or even a colleague writes, is authored by GPT, or in part authored by GPT, because you can easily So actually, if I knew that you were doing that screening, now that I know you're doing it, I would simply take the text from GPT and modify it. Now you can't tell that it came from GPT. So it's scary times, but it also means that we need to change what we do. And that's one reason why Steve could hopefully point us in the right direction.
Good morning. I've been looking at ChatGPT and writing for like 2 weeks. So there's your context.
So you're an expert.
I'm an expert. one thing I think is true, and I don't believe it's hyperbolic. Education changed in November. We are fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be teaching right now at this time where higher education is changed. This is a change in technology, but it's not like technology, we're going from typing to word processing. That changed. As a writing teacher, that changed some of what we do as a writing teacher. People were kind of talking about, the end of penmanship. Okay. There are some consequences to this that are going to affect how we teach and how our students learn fundamentally with this technology now. So a couple of things just to put in context of I'm just going to offer some thoughts of things of what we need to be considering as people who use writing in our teaching. Number one, my first concern was students are going to use this to cheat. That was my first. As soon as I saw what it could do, I thought, all right, they're going to cheat. And I still believe that, of course. Yes, there are going to be students who cheat. Every time there's new technology, there'll be people who use it to take shortcuts. We can't stop that. It's going to be impossible. If we think we're going to outsmart AI, we'll make this change to our assignments. We'll teach it, and we're going to outsmart it. We're going to lose. 2 weeks ago, when I started reading about this, people were saying, writing teachers were saying, if you have assignments that require citing texts, ChatGPT can't do that. 2 weeks later, it can do it. Right? If you have writing that is reflective writing assignments, maybe that's the way to get around it. You can use ChatGPT, and I haven't played with it, but my guess would be if you write something and you write a command, could you rewrite it so it sounds more reflective? You'll get a new draft. Right? So the two caveats, I'll be giving some ideas about things we can do differently as writing teachers and teachers who use writing in our classes. In the back of your skeptical mind, you'll be saying, yeah, we can do that, but students will still cheat. Yes, agreed. Right? Okay. That's not an objection to things we can do to use this technology better in our classes, because we're never going to stop that. And I will also point out, before we get on our moral high horses, there are a number of publications now, academic journals, that are having to pull articles that were published by faculty online. They're having to pull them because they found out the faculty wrote those articles in whole or in part with ChatGPT and didn't say so when they submitted the articles for publication. Students aren't the only ones who are going to use this to cheat. Right? And I was joking yesterday, and it's kind of a joke. I feel really sorry for the little small literary magazines, because they're going to get flooded with poetry submissions. I could sit there and I could sit at my desk and ask this technology to write 10, 12 poems. I submit them to journals, hoping to hit one or two that say yes. I increase my vita. My resume's got more published poetry on it. Who's going to know? You can ask it to write a sonnet, it'll write a sonnet for you. A sonnet in Elizabethan English, it'll do it. In modern English, it'll change it. All in seconds. The technology is incredible. My guess, I'm not a futurist, but looking in the future a little bit, my guess is as a teacher, I'm going to be using this technology a lot as a search engine. That's what I'm going to be using it for, and asking my students to use it for. One of the engineers who put together Google Mail said 2 days ago that he believes in about 2 years, Google as a search engine will cease to exist. Now, it's become a verb, right? It's going to be supplanted by this technology because what this offers people who search, I want to know, I want to think, I want to buy a car. Compare two models of cars that I'm thinking about and, by gas mileage, resale value, safety, right? I can do a Google search and you know what I'll get? I'll get a list of things to click on and read, right? If I do it through this technology, it gives me an answer, a comparison of that data in a couple of paragraphs to read. We'll be using this instead of a Google search, I think. So given all those and where we kind of are, and as we think through this with writing, just some things come to mind. The advent of GPT will make us ask about how are we using writing in our classes and for what purposes? If we're using writing to test for learning, spit back information, I can see students using GPT all the time, right? If we're using it to promote learning about a topic, there are specific kinds of writing to learn tasks that have been used successfully for 50 years or more in classes that students can continue to do that ChatGPT will be of no help, right? And we're talking about small, low-stakes, pass-fail kinds of exploratory writing. There would be no benefit for students using ChatGPT to do this. A lot of it will be done in class. Or are we also using writing to develop specific reading, writing, research, reasoning skills? This is the part that scares me. As you know, there are certain things about writing that you can only learn by doing the writing. It's like trying to learn how to draw. You can only learn it by trying to learn how to draw. If you click a button to make the machine do the drawing for you, you haven't developed that skill. It's the same thing with writing. You have to kind of struggle through the writing to learn how to do those skills. And so if as a teacher, I'm really concerned about what those reading, writing, research, or reasoning skills are, I've got to figure out a way to make sure my students are developing those skills and not just giving them assignments that they can do by hitting a button. I've got to figure out more ways in my classes to have them practice those skills and give them feedback on it, right? My guess is that the more our classes use a low number of high-stake writing assignments instead of a lot of low-stakes writing assignments, the chances are greater the students are going to use GPT to do those assignments. The ones that are one paper you do for the course, it's 90% of the course grade, they get one shot at writing it. I think those are going to be more liable to have problems with this than writing assignments that are more geared to promote learning in the classroom over the course of a semester. Other questions. How are these purposes reflected in our writing assignments and activities? We have to really think about what we're asking our students to write and why. And someone had written this, I took this from a conversation, said if AI can do the assignment well, is the assignment worth doing? Why are we doing it if AI can write it for them? I think this technology is going to have a huge impact on the classes we teach, in particularly business writing in English. I don't believe, I'm in fairly short order, people are going to be hired in business to be business or technical writers, not to create text, but to edit text. AI will be generating the text, but companies are going to need human beings to look at that, modify it, edit it, improve it. They're not going to be at a meeting and say, dream up this idea and start from scratch. They're not going to start from scratch. And in fact, this morning, as I was thinking about it this morning, what I would do in a writing class. I've got to figure out what I'm going to do now in English 100. How am I going to teach that writing class? My guess is I may end up having to start with have students use ChatGPT and come up with a base text to start with on any particular writing assignment. And then my job as a writing teacher is going to have to teach them how to make it stronger rhetorically, how to improve that. But I think the rough draft for writing is going to be produced by this now, by and large by our students. What we want to make sure is that they don't turn that in as the final draft. I've used this to write a couple of papers, this technology. The writing's not great. I'm teaching a class in the short story right now. So I tried it and said, give me an essay on the theme of good and evil in Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown. And it shot out a paper. And the paper, if I were grading it, C- or D. It's redundant, it's formulaic. There were no quotes from the story. No quotes were tied to the text as I would expect. But it did lay out some good ideas. And if I'm reading, I said, well, yeah, that's right. In a very general way, that is what Hawthorne's doing. I'd agree with that. So I think it gives us good starter texts for students. But we have to figure out what are we asking them to write and why do we want them to do that? And are there ways that we can use ChatGPT to do that better? Instead of trying to guard and defend against it, are there ways we can integrate it and use it? Because it's not going away. Right? It's here and it's not going to go anywhere. How can we make it less relevant or useful to the writing students do? What if some of the assignments we ask them to do, GPT won't help the students do it? And there's plenty of writing assignments that are like that we can do. That it's not going to be of much use to them. I'm trying one now. I don't know if it would work. A fairly simple assignment where in the short story class, I'm asking the students to pick one quotation or passage from one story. And in a 2-page paper, close reading, tell me why that's a key or important passage. I could put in a caveat that says, your discussion should reflect things we've talked about in class. GPT can't help them. They don't know what we talked about in class. Right? So there are ways we can think about the assignments that make sense to our students, help us hit our learning goals, that this is not going to be much help. What I think is really important is how do we make our students critical users of it? This is going to be text generated by an algorithm, right? The text that's generated is going to reflect the biases of the person who wrote the algorithm. We know that from what happens on Twitter. We know that what happened on Google. You can write an algorithm that gives the preference to this point of view and not that point of view, that endorses this one, suppresses that one. So what I'm afraid of is a student's going to do a search, come up with an essay, and not realize that that's very limited in terms of the perspectives it's offering. The chances are it's very limited in the perspective it's offering because it's going to reflect the biases of the person writing the algorithm. And that they have to be able to look at it and say, what do I agree with? What do I disagree with? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? GPT does not produce perfect texts. Some of the citations it uses now are bogus. They don't exist. They're not real. Students wouldn't know that. They just use the text. So I think there's a lot of questions as we start using this technology that we have to teach our students to be more critical of what it's producing, right? And just not blindly consume it. And can we use it to help them achieve course goals? We have to help the students understand what it can and can't do well. How do we incorporate it into our pedagogy and our learning goals? I haven't thought this through. What about students for whom English is a second language, our ESL students, who struggle with the conventions of standard English? How will this help? How could it help those students communicate more effectively and learn English, learn how to write English better? It could be, I don't know the implications of it, but it just seems to me it could be a huge aid, right? How do we incorporate it into our classes? And then how do we use it to help our students improve their writing and editing skills? I think that's what I'm looking at right now as I'm thinking about this, is how I can see myself using a lot of a ChatGPT text as a base text, and then really focusing on revision skills, stylistics, rhetoric. I can see myself doing focused revisions, right? So they have a base text. I can tell them how to revise it. I want you to revise this. I want you to go out and find 3 articles of researchers who disagree with this position and incorporate that into your text. All the text that is produced by this are almost always simple or compound sentences. Stylistically, they do not produce complex or compound complex sentences. I can talk about stylistics and have them rewrite it in a different kind of style. I can have them rewrite it for a different audience. There are ways I can still teach what I need to teach about writing, right? And reading and being critical. And then how does it relate to our current policies regarding academic dishonesty? This is a tough one we have to think about. Is this plagiarism? If they go to ChatGPT, they print out a paper, they put their name on it and turn it in. Is that plagiarism? We'd probably say yes. We'd have to explain why, right? You're taking credit for text that you really didn't produce. The machine produced it. What's going to be the penalty, and how does that fit into our current policies of academic honesty? I'm not saying it's just a question. We need to figure that out, how to articulate that to students, because they are going to be using it. So I think that's just some of the questions that came to mind as I'm thinking about this and how it impacts writing, how we use writing in our classes, how we're going to teach writing. And I know with real certainty, any answer I come up with today, the way this is going, next week is probably going to have to be a different answer. That is just the age we're in right now as educators. That's where we are. And there's no way to escape that. We can't close our eyes and pretend it's not there.
All right, how are you guys feeling now? At the beginning of this, David asked how everybody was doing and if you were worried or not, and kind of worried. How about now? Have you learned something that makes you feel better, or are you a little more concerned? If you had to rate it on a scale from like 1 to 10, 1 being this is the greatest thing ever, I can't wait to see what happens with, let's not do that. How do I get that to go away? Okay. You make that go away for me, David? I can't wait to see what happens with writing here. Or are you somewhere around a 10 where you're thinking about this and you're like, okay, the robots are coming for us and I should have retired yesterday. So if you're like me, you will probably swing back and forth between somewhere like a 2, maybe a 3, and a 15, like in any given day. So it's okay. If you're feeling that way, it's fine. We're all learning this together and we'll get through it together. Hopefully, I can give you some ideas for your classes to help like assuage some of your concerns, some practical things that you can do today. Also some ideas looking ahead, to maybe fall semester, what kind of changes can you make? And these will give you some peace of mind. My very first piece of advice for you is don't ignore this. The fact that you're here tells me that you're not going to ignore it. So this is really, really good. But the reason I say this is over the past few weeks, I've asked some friends and colleagues, not the ones who worked on this presentation, but I asked some friends and colleagues, what do you think about ChatGPT? What are you doing? And every single one of them said, well, for now, I'm just going to go ahead and ignore it and see what happens. All of them. I was like, ooh, we're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. Definitely don't ignore it. Talk to your students about this. Take this to your classes. Ask your students what they're thinking about this. Ask your students if they know what ChatGPT is. The answer is yes. Ask them if they've used it. The answer is yes. In fact, on Yik Yak 45 minutes ago, students were talking about how we're presenting on it to faculty today. They're on to us. So they know that we're here. So have this conversation with them. You can ask them how they feel about it. I mean, they're grappling with questions in their collegiate career that we didn't have to think about as college students. I think it seems a little scary. What's this going to look like? What's the workforce going to be for these students? Ask them how they feel and get that conversation going, and who knows where that can lead. If you don't have the time in class or you're worried about bringing it up in class, you don't have to. There are options here for you. There's a wonderful, there's a wonderful tool here on Isidore called Check-In. You can modify questions to anything you want to ask your students on their own time. They can answer these questions. This could be a great way to kind of get the pulse of your students. It could also be, I think, a really great starting point for a class discussion. See what they're doing and then just talk about it, okay, and get it out there. If you're not sure how to do this or you don't know about these tools, just reach out to us. We can help you with this and we can get this set up for you. And we will help in more ways as well. There is an absolutely incredibly helpful, amazing online guide that will be outdated by about 5 p.m. today. But there is a wonderful guide on ChatGPT that we put together. It has so many wonderful ideas. Use this, reference this. You can find it in the upper left-hand corner on the Isidore homepage. So check this out, look through that, and read over it. I assume that will have to be updated pretty regularly. I'm so sorry, Julia. That's going to be something that has to be adapted over time as we figure out more and more. And along those lines, you can also find in that guide some wonderful little blurbs that you can put in your syllabus. I recommend doing this sooner rather than later. Making a decision about how you want to approach this in class. We've given you some samples here, ideas that you might want to use. Whether you want to prohibit the use of ChatGPT in your class, good luck. Whether you would like to have limited use or whether you'd like to fully integrate it. So there are some different options here. Feel free to play with this to whatever suits your purposes best in your class, okay? I know that we're all worried about cheating. I know as an instructor, this was my very first thought as well. We have established, I think, that it will happen. Yeah, we can agree they're going to cheat. What a wonderful cheating tool to have. It's really fabulous. If you haven't played with it yet, please do. It's great fun. It will do wonderful things. But we do need to think about this. Some of these things have already been discussed a little bit. We're not interested in blocking IP addresses. This is not going to work. Turnitin does have something in the works, and so hopefully there'll be something there that will be of some use. There's also this wonderful site called GPT-0. I don't know if you've heard of this before. It was actually developed by a Princeton student, wondering if the students know about this. They developed the site to determine the probability that a sample text was generated by a computer or a human. And that sounds pretty cool, right? It gives you like a percentage after it goes through this process. Now, I will tell you as an instructor, this is completely impractical. It takes like 10 minutes for it to run through, and then you end up with this percentage at the end of it, and what are you supposed to do with that? You get this percentage and it says this is 60% likely that a computer produced this. Okay, that's good to know. I mean, that's not helpful at all. So I would say, while this is interesting, this isn't really a solution for us. But I do think there's hope. I just sent everybody all the way up to like 10. There is some hope here. I think the single greatest detection device that you guys have is you in your classes. You know your class. You know your students. You read these papers year after year, semester after semester. You know the stuff they talk about. You know the same sources they use every time. You know what you're looking for. You also know what it's like when you're grading papers and you've been doing it for hours and like you're zoning out every once in a while, but you're really focusing, you're trying to stay on there. And then all of a sudden you read something and you think, huh? And then you go back and you read it again and something about it tells you it's wrong. And you're not sure what, but something's wonky there. In the olden days, and by olden days I mean October of 2022, in the olden days, you could take that passage and you could just stick it in like a search bar and be like, haha, I knew it, this is Wikipedia. All right, it's easier when they use the hyperlinks and they keep it in there. That's helpful. but it's harder now, right? But that intuition is still there. I promise you that human voice is different, at least for now, I should say. At least for now, that voice is different. So listen for it. Read it. Think about your students. You don't have to know your individual students exactly to know if it seems right or not. Okay, so trust that intuition. The other thing that we need to consider is that we need to understand the limitations as they exist and as they change, of course, over time, and look for ways to limit those. We cannot prevent the cheating. I don't think there's any way we can. But what we can do is we can make it more difficult and we can throw up some roadblocks. And so this is what we need to do. Make it more difficult for them to cheat. Make it more challenging for AI to deal with your assignments and make your students less inclined to want to do it in the first place. Okay? So understanding those limitations will be helpful. We've talked about this idea of in-class writing. For some classes, this will be a great solution. This is not a solution for everyone, and I don't even see this as a permanent solution either, but it's a possibility. It has its place for sure. We've talked about current events as well. If you ask your students to talk about current events, they'll struggle with this. Anything after spring 2022, I'll tell you that yesterday this slide said anything after 2021, and I had to update it because it's changed. So right back up to 10 again. All right. Also, it struggles with specificity. So keep it specific. Ask your students about very specific things in your prompts. Look for specific examples. AI can't quite do this. It struggles. There's a generality to its speech. It's very shallow. This is the kind of thing that the more you see it, the more you'll recognize it, and you'll start recognizing that in your students too. And I know sometimes students speak generically as well, but it's different. That little voice in your head will tell you it's different. And of course, scaffolding is a great option, not just for getting to know your students better, but also kind of relieving the stress of the grading over the semester. Now, you may have a class where writing isn't necessary. Maybe this isn't the best way to assess your students' learning. So think outside the box a little bit. This might be time to start challenging yourself. I'm not going to go through all of these. Many of these you guys have seen before. I have reflections on here. We know that there are workarounds for a lot of these options, but keep it specific. Get all the tools that you have in your arsenal and get them working together. I will highlight creative projects here though. Because I'm completely biased. I come from a background in art history, so of course I'm gonna like creative projects. And I'll tell you from my own personal experience, before ChatGPT, I had a class where in art history, any intro art history class, the standard paper is a visual analysis paper. Every art history class in the history of the whole world does this. It's just what it is. It's 3 to 10 pages depending on the class and the teacher. You find a painting, you analyze it. So I had one semester where I thought, I can't bear the thought of grading another visual analysis paper. I am going to burst into flames. I have to come up with something new. And so I decided to give them a project instead. I asked them to select their painting for analysis, but then they had to create a playlist of 5 tracks of music that best described the painting. And then they submitted a written component to me where they connected the sounds to the visuals. And it was things like the complexity of the music and the complexity of the composition, or the mood of the music and the mood of the painting. They found really interesting connections. And what I realized is I was able to see what they learned in a completely different way, and it was way more effective, and they were looking way more closely at that painting than they ever did for my paper. So it's possible. Sometimes it just takes a little creativity. You can come up with something different. This is something else too, by the way, that we can help you with. If you want to bounce some ideas off of us, we're just sitting around in the LTC waiting for you to come and talk to us. So come on down there and we can help you with this as well. Now, I think more likely we'll need to start thinking about how we're going to integrate this into our class. Okay? So there are some great ideas in that online guide. Please read through those, check those out. There's some wonderful ideas there. This is more long-term. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have a lot of time in my semester to reinvent my class. So maybe looking forward to fall, you might want to think about how you can reimagine some of your ideas and ways to use ChatGPT in your class and make it work for you. This, I think, is incredibly valuable, right? The world that our students are going to go into after college is going to be a world of AI. It is our job to teach them, to equip them so that they will understand how to use it, to teach them to be discerning consumers of this product. Just as we teach them to use the internet and books, we need to teach them how to use this. Okay, so how can we do this to maximize their experience here and prepare them the way we're supposed to? Okay? Whatever route you guys decide to do, whatever you choose to do, and this is a lot, I hope that you'll trust yourself and I hope that you'll support your students. Okay, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to ChatGPT. Just as there is no one-size-fits-all approach to education, you need to look at your class, take the time, think about your assessments, what are your objectives, and how can you maximize them in this new world that we're all living in. There are always solutions. Sometimes they just take a little more time, okay? And support your students in this. Remind them of their humanity. This is what makes us great, right? We're not computers. We're people. People still want music. They still want poetry. They still want this stuff because we have something special to offer, and remind your students of that. Help them find their unique voice, find that learning and creative thought that this is the goal of why they're here. It's not about a letter grade every 16 weeks. This is something more, okay? So let's use this as an opportunity to grow. I know that this is so much. I know it's so much information that I'm giving you guys here. You can reach out to us for assistance. We can help in many different ways. You can contact us at this email address. You can go into the online guide and there's a Google form you can fill out. We're available. So take advantage of these resources. You are not navigating this alone. You have a lot of support and a lot of people with great ideas, and we can all do this together. Okay, so reach out to us. Again, that guide is fantastic. It's really, I talk about it quite a bit. It's really wonderful. And we'll have a recording of this session as well, so you can go back and reference it if you have any questions on that. Now, in the little bit of time I have left, because I want to make sure we have some time for questions, I did want to share something that occurred to me last week as I was thinking about this. I was thinking about ChatGPT and what this means for higher education. And like any reasonable person, my thoughts went to Louis Daguerre. Right? I'm sure you guys did too. Louis Daguerre was a gregarious, risk-taking Frenchman, and in August of 1839, he stood in front of all of Paris and he announced a process to the world that he very humbly named after himself. He called it the daguerreotype. It's really good stuff, big stuff here. The daguerreotype is now recognized as the world's very first viable photographic process. It's incredible, incredible. Louis Daguerre had solved this riddle where he had figured out how to capture the visual world, the moving visual world all around us, and preserve it. This thing that no one had done before. Amazing stuff. And the response was massive. In very technical terms, the people went berserk. People went absolutely berserk. There was a frenzy to buy materials. Louis Daguerre gave them all of it, free of charge. Everyone except for England and Wales. Everybody else had it free of charge. He told them the materials they would need. He told them the processes, the exact steps. And if everybody had these things and followed these steps, they too could do this, just like that. And they did, in a big way. People rushed home. They went to their nearest store to pick up some iodine and mercury, like you do. They got everything they needed. They rushed home. They tested out. And sure enough, everyone could do it. And then they set up shops where they could sell supplies. They became suppliers of the supplies to the supply stores. They set up portrait studios. There was this frenzy around all of this. This announcement was huge. By December of 1839, it had reached a fever pitch. They even called it daguerreotype mania. This is like a nice word for saying people lost their minds over this new technology. It was incredible. Not everybody thought it was incredible. Some people were concerned about this. There was a French painter named Paul Delaroche who looked at this and he recognized that this could be problematic here. He was a portrait painter, a very good one too. And he said, the artist's role since the beginning of time has been to be the recorder of history. We are the ones that record the faces of the great kings and queens. We are the ones that record the biblical stories, the mythological stories. We record history. How important a job is that? And he said, all of a sudden, there is this thing, there is a machine that is on the scene without a soul, without a mind of its own, a technical machine that can do our job. And it can do our job more accurately, and it can do it faster, and it can do it way cheaper. So like any reasonable person, Paul Delaroche, upon seeing his first daguerreotype, declared, "From today, all painting is dead." Does that sound familiar at all? Huh? See what I did there? Yeah? So did painting die in 1839? Of course not. Of course not. We still have painters today. We still value skill of painting. Hyper-realistic paintings are still important today. However, painting did change, and it changed in a massive way. For the first time ever in the history of the world, painting took on a totally new visual language that had never existed before because it didn't have to. But now there was something that kind of relieved the pressure from artists and allowed them to do something new. Okay? For better or worse. We can have a discussion about modern art later if you want to. But it changed. Now, isn't it possible that that's what's going to happen with writing? Isn't that exciting? At least a little bit. Are you guys around like 1 or 2 yet? We can get to this point where we can be a part of this transformation. I don't know where it's going to go. They certainly didn't know where painting was going to go, and we don't know where writing is going to go now. But we should be open to this change, and we should be eager to adapt and make decisions that will best prepare us. We are, as mentioned earlier, a Marinus University. This is part of our mission. We have a promise to ourselves and our students that we will courageously adapt and we will decisively respond. Okay, and we can do that together. All right, now we got a little bit of time left. If you guys have some questions, I'll make David come back up here and be the MC. Oh, I also have for you guys some resources here, and there's a QR code that you can use to access that guide if you want to go straight from here as well.
Questions? Tom?
So, I mean, I really appreciate particularly the comparison to here, this whole idea of the emergence of a new technology, new innovation. It always gets very disruptive, and early on, you think back to even in the industrial age, and the invention of the steam engine was going to put everybody out of work because it does better out in our muscles and things of that nature. The one thing that I keep thinking about with dealing with this now and how to frame this, one thing I'm trying to understand where we can leverage it in a way that's more meaningful to learning. And part of what I'm worried about is that I've always kind of believed the notion that time on task is one of our most effective ways of learning. And so I'm thinking, okay, so how do we leverage ChatGPT to increase meaningful time on task that'll drive to learning? And I've heard a couple good ideas here, but I'm kind of thinking that this is going to be probably one of our major themes to make sure that ChatGPT doesn't put, higher ed out of business, because the time on task piece there is, particularly for undergraduate education, I think is important. Have you thought about what other kinds of things might be involved there?
Well, I think that's a really good point. This idea of the speed that gives you that information back, because you're absolutely right. There's the time of failure, too, when you're working on something and learning is so valuable. It's going to be one of those things that we're going to have to really figure out how to, kind of force the students in, like rethink the way that we approach assignments, like how are we going to get them working on it. I think engaging their minds in different ways might be a really valuable approach. But of course, again, I'm biased on that too. But do you have any ideas on that, David?
Well, I keep thinking that we've gone through transitions before where the content in the classroom became part of the cloud. So, when textbooks arose, that was seen to be a challenge. Actually, just going from oral to writing was a challenge between Aristotle and Plato. So it's like we've had these punctuations, and it's just like, I think the punctuation just hit us so quickly that even the people in AI didn't expect this to happen until, 20 years from now. So the fact that it exists means that our students are going to have employment that will be different. So we have to, I think time on task means that to be effective writers means that you have to turn to the AI to make the writing happen. You're still a professional. You're going to be a writer, but your pen is way more intelligent.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it actually, for time on task for writing, I think this is going to be a huge help. What student writers make a mistake, and one of the major mistakes they make in allocating time to write, if you just map out what they're doing in the writing process, they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get a first draft because they try to make it perfect. When you look at how professionals write, they spend a minute amount of time on the first draft. All the time is on revision. So if you look at total time on task, if we can get the students, I try it in all of my classes now, to shift the attention to revision, that's where you become a better writer. But instead, they spend an inordinate amount of tasks just on sweating out the first draft, and they spend so much time on it, it's like, I'm not going to go back into a second draft. It took me too long to write this one. And I'm thinking, if I can use this technology to get past that first draft and a lot more time on task of how do I revise, how do I rewrite, how do I make this mine, how do I make it unique, I think that's, for me, going to be a better use of time on task for developing our students' writing skills.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all very much for being here. We didn't mean to be purveyors of bad news, but it's the reality. And I think now you're better prepared to think about what that means in your teaching. So don't panic about change. Make small changes now. Longer term changes come slower. And that's the role of the LTC in helping make that happen. Good luck. Please reach out to us if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of the semester. Thank you.